I'm Orville Schell, Director of the Asia Society's Center on U.S.-China Relations. It's a great pleasure to be back here at Berkeley and with all of you. Our next topic is getting the data out, institutions, media, and government policy. Let me just quickly try to set this up a little. I think we've heard from the last speaker, from Tom, about the absolute importance of information in any country in terms of making progress on the environmental front. And information obviously comes from a number of sources. It comes from the state, it comes from corporations, and I think perhaps most important, it also comes from civil society, from NGOs. And I think if there's one thing that we have learned in watching environmental movements around the world develop, it is this, that governments alone rarely are able to get on top of the very grave environmental problems that are confronting them unless they are both pushed by and can rely on the support of outside forces. And so NGOs have turned into a rather substantial generator of information, and I think increasingly good information. And I should also say, I think they are filling in a vacuum that is very often left by the media, and providing that information in ways that's transparent and thus can be used as a lever to push forward government policy. So that's an absolutely critical dynamic, it seems to me, in both the future of the environmental movement in this country and in China. Now, I think if you think about this whole process as something of a food chain, and I should also say a food chain that may not be functioning very well, it goes something like this. Information is generated, it is publicized, made available, it causes debate and discussion. These are sort of links leading up to the final conclusion. It gets vectored out by the media. And that is, in my view, and part of our panel's discussion, a crucial element in all of this. Because if that link doesn't work successfully, if the information isn't lofted out into the public debate, it cannot go on to the next stage, which is then lawsuit, policy formation, and ultimately, of course, at the end of this food chain is law. And if any stage of this chain, which begins with transparent information, is disrupted, we don't get to the end of the chain, which is some sorts of conclusions that are either regulations, law, or some rather concrete courses of action, which usually have to be taken by a government or governments. And so I think this is what we are here to discuss today, is that food chain. And I think, interestingly enough, in China, we see a great deal more information being developed. And even on the state side, I had a very interesting conversation last night about environmental impact assessments and outlines of them now being increasingly made available in a public fashion, which involves a whole new set of dynamics to go into force in the interaction between a state and society. So this is what we're here to consider. Let me introduce very quickly our speakers, because I think you all have this, do you not? Biographical descriptions of everybody in great length. No? Yes. Good. That'll save us a lot of time. Isabel Hilton is British. She has been a journalist for a long, long time, working for many newspapers, The Independent, The Guardian, the BBC, writing for The New Yorker, writing books as well. And most notably now, she has started a very interesting website called China Dialogue, which is a bilingual website that translates all sorts of articles and discussions on environmental issues into China, from English to Chinese or Chinese to English. I urge you all to have a look at it. It's a very interesting, important source of information on the topics we're going to cover here. Isabel is going to talk about the limitations on the public right to know. Isabel?
Thank you. Shall I come up there? Let's do it right from here. Yeah, okay. I just had some images, but maybe they can operate there. It's only some illustration. It doesn't matter. I'm just as happy to talk. And thank you very much, Orville, and thank you, Tom, for this wonderful conference. I was amused by Barbara's reference to Moscow and there being no phone book, because when I first went to China, which was in the early 70s, there was no phone book either, on the grounds that if you had a right to call a number, you would have been told. And that was the old system in which there was no public right to know, and the control of information was part of the general mechanism of social and political control. And there was a country obligation to know everything that the government wanted you to know, but no right to know anything that it didn't. And the transition from that state monopoly of information to the more market-based, more democratic approach to information is something that is in progress, but it is, like a lot of things in China, very much in transition. And so the public right to know is in itself a place of tension and competing interests, and the competing interests are both between different ideas of public good and between public good and private interests. And these tensions are very much exacerbated by wider tensions over decision-making powers, decisions, past mistakes, and the perceived conflict between two other perceived public goods, one of which is rapid development, industrialization, and the other being environmental protection, which are still widely seen in China as mutually exclusive. You know, the develop first, clean up later school of argument versus the sustainable development. And I'm not going to go into that in any detail because I'm sure you're fairly familiar with it. There is nevertheless, at government level, a growing recognition of the importance of the right to know in this new transitional phase of China. And the Chinese government has recognized that public participation is an essential tool for environmental protection and an essential check on the abuse of power. And the argument is made from central government that the public cannot participate effectively if it is uninformed, and the two are therefore very closely bound up. Very quickly on the legal position, there have been some key bits of legislation. In 1989, China's Environment Protection Law, which said that all units and individuals shall have the obligation to protect the environment and the right to report on or file charges against units or individuals that cause pollution or damage, followed by the law on evaluation of environmental effects in 2003 that stipulated that the authorities must hold consultative meetings and public hearings to collect opinions. But though these rights were therefore enshrined in law, there was, as Barbara pointed out, a real problem about implementation. So the right to know remained very weak, it remained very hard to exercise, and the mechanisms for disclosure and participation simply didn't exist. And if there are no mechanisms, then the public can't effectively participate. Now that again started to change in, there were three key incidents that I'm going to, well, they'll be familiar to you, that I'm just going to touch on. The first one was Jiang in November 2005, when 100 tons of toxic benzene compounds were discharged into the Songhua River. One of the notorious aspects of this incident was the attempt by the authorities to conceal it. So Jilin province didn't tell Heilongjiang, and by the time this 50-mile oil benzene slick reached Heilongjiang and the water supply to Harbin was suddenly cut off, there was kind of public panic. People started to flee the city, literally, because they knew something horrible was happening. The Harbin authorities told them this was routine maintenance, and everybody just started to evacuate. So it was a major loss of face. And after quite extensive coverage of this incident for a couple of weeks, there was one of those rather characteristic, anyone who works in or around journalism in China recognizes this, the news suddenly stops, Everyone had been told not to report it anymore. So it was an international incident also because the river flows into Russia. So this was a major embarrassment to China. And it was one of the things that greatly strengthened those people in China who argued for the right to know and freedom of information. So in March of 2006, we suddenly see Jin Guo, who's a deputy to the 10th National People's Congress, advancing two very important propositions: that the right to a clean and safe environment should be regarded as a basic human right, and to guarantee this right, the citizens' right to learn environmental information and to participate in protection should be included in the Constitution. Now, he put it in terms of human rights and pointed out the failing of the existing law. The problem with a rights-based approach is that it very much depends on somebody guaranteeing those rights and the mechanisms being in place for those rights to be affected. And that was the next step, which in January of this year, the State Council adopted the decrees on government information and the right to know. They were promulgated by Wen Jiabao in April, and they will actually come into force next year on May the 1st, 2008. It covers many aspects of government information, but as far as the environment is concerned, there are 3 or 4 clauses which include situation on the approval of great construction projects and their implementation, emergency plans, early warning information and response to unexpected public incidents, supervision and inspection of environmental protection, public health, safe production, etc., etc. Although this is technically not a law, but in the absence of a law, a decree from the State Council functions as a law. So for the first time, there really was an important piece of legislation which guaranteed this right. And finally, I should mention that in the 17th Party Congress, in Hu Jintao's rather long speech, which I'm sure you've all read from cover to cover, Section 6, which is staringly entitled Unswervingly Developing Socialist Democracy, he talks about expanding people's democracy and to ensure that they're master of the country, and he talks about improving information and intellectual support for democratic decision-making, increasing transparency, and expanding public participation. And he says this rather telling phrase, power must be exercised in the sunshine to ensure that it's exercised correctly. So he reinforces the idea that the public right to know is not a great sort of gift granted from on high, but it's also a necessary part of good governance. It's part of the supervision of corrupt officials. It's part of the mechanism that can ensure that wrong decisions are not made. So it was very important. Nevertheless, since China is a country in transition, there are quite a few problems still. And we at China Dialogue, we come up against these problems quite a lot because we're available in Chinese, in China, we're on a Chinese server. So we have to be extremely sensitive to the constraints on information, what the public can know at any particular moment, what it's inconvenient to make known at any particular moment, because we, are effectively functioning as a Chinese medium. So it's an interesting experience for a Western journalist, and one from which I've learned a lot. And I've learned a lot about how Chinese journalists manage to negotiate in these rather shark-infested waters. So there is in China a growing tradition of investigative journalism, and there is a recognition of the power of that in raising complaints, in bringing lawsuits, in putting things to right, particularly with CCTV. And in any local dispute, you will find that the really important thing that someone's trying to do is get the attention of CCTV, because once it's been on CCTV, then they know that they have a fair wind behind their effort. There's more than CCTV can ever attend to. And if you go slightly lower down the food chain of journalism, you find that it becomes rather more complicated, that for a local medium to take on a big local power holder to expose an abuse is very difficult. Sometimes they get round this by calling their friends in other provinces who can come and report a story and report it either back to the center or in other provincial media, and not face the direct retribution from the local power holder. So that's one way around it. There are other sources of information which, as Barbara said, are growing in China, NGOs and social movements being one. In general, though, their problem is that they suffer both from insecurity and from lack of capacity, and they are very vulnerable both to local and to national pressure. They're reliable in some cases, and there are some really stellar examples, Ma Jun, who you'll hear later in the conference, being one. But many of them are emotion rather than evidence-based, and so have to be taken with a slight pinch of salt. The academic and expert work suffers from It's voluminous, but it is very difficult of access. The industrial and commercial information is hard to obtain. It's not mandatory in China. It tends to be unreliable. And the legal work Barbara has talked about, that is extremely difficult to get information. Then there's the Chinese internet, the chat rooms, the blogs, and so on. That is also voluminous, also very hard to check, and very subject to official pressure. The obstacle, I think one of the main obstacles to the free flow of information is that, as you know, environmental issues cause a lot of conflict in China. There were 51,000 admitted disputes in 2005. And where you get an environmental issue which is beginning to cause social conflict, and the authorities feel that they have to choose between public order and freedom of information, they almost inevitably choose public order. A classic case of this, but an interesting case because it shows both processes at work, is the Shaman chemical factory dispute, which arose this year. And this was a proposition by a Taiwanese company to build a chemical plant which was projected to produce 800,000 tons of p-xylene a year, which is a toxic chemical, located very close to a residential district in Shaman. Local residents became very alarmed. They organized a campaign. They mobilized public support using all means that they're available. And they recruited experts. They recruited political support. It was really a model civic campaign. So in March, Zhao Yufeng, who was with the Chinese Academy of Sciences and also a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, proposed that the plant be relocated to avoid the threat of pollution in the future. Now, this plant had had an EIA, according to the local authority, which had approved it. But public concern continued to grow, and it resulted in May in a whole series of very large demonstrations in Shaman. And day after day, people were mobilized and marching against this plant. Again, you know, you got to a certain point, it was getting a lot of coverage, and then suddenly there was a news blackout. You know, the internet was shut down in the province, and people were told that they could no longer report this. However, in this instance, what was interesting, and here you see the other mechanism at work, was that there was an intervention by SIPA, by Pan Yue, who suggested that the whole plant that the building of the plant, which had begun, be halted for another environmental impact assessment to be done. And this time, it wouldn't be under the control of the local authority. It would be commissioned from Beijing by the Chinese Research Academy of Environmental Sciences. And so that was, that's what happened. The protests slowly calmed down, and life returned to normal while this new assessment was done. And a shortened version of this assessment has this week just been published, and it's been published on the Shaman municipal website. And the public has been notified that they have 10 days in which to put in suggestions and recommendations to the municipal authority. Finally, the municipal authority will make a decision, but there is another round of public input, and the question remains open. It's a very valuable plant for a city that, thank you, a city that has, it would effectively double the city's GDP. So there's a lot of economic pressure on the city to build the plant, and there is a huge public pressure against it. The final case, and I'm getting down to the wire here, my chairman tells me, the Three Gorges Dam, familiar to all of you. And this, again, has been interesting this year because since it was approved in 1991, effectively all criticism, and there has been voluminous criticism of the Three Gorges Dam, has pretty much been silenced. The project was approved, it was going ahead, it was going to be built, and what's more, it was going to be a tremendous credit to China, was the official view. It became very difficult, therefore, to raise objections. It was, you know, one of those iconic projects that were beyond criticism, until September this year. And suddenly in September this year, Xinhua, the official news agency, published an extraordinary report which warned that the dam, which is now filling up, had the potential to cause environmental catastrophe, and those were the words used. And the reason was that the pressure was building up behind the dam and going up the tributaries, destabilizing the geology and causing landslides, and that a further 5 million people, according to this report, could have to be relocated. 1.4 million people already have been relocated. So this was an extraordinary departure for Xinhua. We got terribly excited, thought, oh, hooray, we can publish about the Three Gorges Dam. We did publish a very good piece about the Three Gorges Dam, and about this process of, as it were, not listening to the objections till now. And we did expect, given that the objections to the dam had been so numerous and had been suppressed for so long, that there would now be a flood of similar pieces. And a strange silence fell. Very few people picked it up, so it began to be slightly spooky. And the piece that we had published was picked up on thousands of blogs across China, but the other press in China sort of didn't follow. When that happens, you know that the word has gone out, that actually this isn't really as much of a green light as you thought. This was just before the party congress. The party congress happened, and just after the party congress, there was a meeting on the Three Gorges Dam, at which the same officials who had warned of environmental catastrophe were taking a rather different tone and saying, no, it's all under control, the government's thought of everything, and you really, it's been terribly exaggerated in the foreign press. And this wonderful phrase that one of them came out with which was, don't describe a kitten as a tiger, it's all fine. Unfortunately, just before this meeting with these quotes, there had been a landslide of exactly the kind that had been predicted in the previous meeting. And the landslide, the death toll was first reported as 2 people, and then they discovered a bus underneath the landslide with 36 people, 36 casualties on the bus. So it did become a much bigger event. Now, that event was reported in China, but it was located not near the Three Gorges Dam. It was located very vaguely in central China. So again, you have this rather hybrid situation where, yes, it was reported, but you're not really allowed to make that explicit connection. So, well, how can it be improved? Panier argues for public interest environmental litigation, which I think would be very important. And I feel from, I'm a journalist, so I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think that none of this really works without a greater commitment to freedom of the press. There was a rather ominous quote when the legislation, when the State Council order was passed. There was a quote from someone who'd been involved in drafting it, which said that the media's right to interview is not the same as the public's right to know. Well, up to a point. I think that really those two have to come a little closer together. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. That raises the question of whether the media represents the people, a question which I believe was raised by our own government here in the United States of America. Interesting question. Our next speaker is Jiang Wenran, who comes from Canada, the University of Alberta, where he's on the political science faculty and directs the China Institute there. He's also an advisor to many different energy boards and groups within Canada, and of course comes from an area which is very rich in oil shale, which, as I think many of you know, is a great promise of the future in terms of the petroleum industry, but highly energy inefficient. So, Wenran, please.
Thanks, Orville. Thanks, Tom, thanks for the Berkeley China Initiative to invite me. It's great to be back here. I was here in the last year's conference, and to be very honored to speak. As Orville mentioned, that I'm coming from Alberta, Canada, which now claims to have the second largest oil reserve, counting its oil sands, just next to Saudi Arabia, larger than Iraq. So we often say the U.S. shouldn't fight the war in Iraq. They should just come to occupy Canada. But then they said, we considered Canada already being occupied. So anyway, just a word about the China Institute. We are the polluters, by the way. and most of the emissions targets exceeded by Canada, even when we signed the Kyoto Accord, is still coming from Alberta, and the big debate is going on. But today we talk about China, and so I want to let you know, just very briefly, about the China Institute, a brand new initiative, and it's been the past 2 years we worked hard to get it started, and we received a valuable collection from a private family of the arts and the Chinese artifacts of about 700 pieces collection and donated to our University of Alberta's museum system, which is valued as over $37 million Canadian. And by the way, Canadian dollars now worth more than US. Anyway, the conditions for that donation was to have the provincial government of Alberta to donate the same amount of money, much funding, to create a China Study and Research and Activity Center. And now we have the China Institute. 2 years later, we have, just a few months ago, we had $37.2 million endowment into our account. So the China Institute now claims to be, it is actually the best funded China initiative in Canada, among any of the universities. From the interest alone, we'll have a permanent annual endowment income of $1.5 to $1.8 million. And if I get my way to persuade the board of directors, China's environment and energy issues would be central to our future program. So we look forward to learn from Center of Excellences like the Berkeley China Initiative and others. And we have a brochure, we have some to distribute later if you want to know more about it, and look forward to work with other colleagues. Without further delay, I think I'm just going to jump into the major theme. I actually really was trying to read the organizer's theme on this conference, that is, what do we know and how do we know it? So therefore, I think given the first panel's mandate about getting the data out on the institutions, public opinion, media, and policy, I'm asking 4 questions here for you to consider, for you to debate about China's environment and how China's domestic policies on environmental protection and its continuous drive for modernization can be facilitated in terms of a paradigm shift. And that domestic policy and those changes, we need to ask questions of those questions, I mean, in the framework of not just China, but also in the global context, given the international division of labor today, where China is in that international division of labor and that globalization process. So the first question, what do we know? And second, what should we also know? And third, what we don't really know. And finally, I think, how do we know that we, I use plural here, not just the Chinese, but the international community as well, how do we know that we can actually meet China's increasing environmental challenges? I think we got, as our keynote speaker earlier mentioned, we got a lot of information, sometimes overflow of information. Many of you, I'm pretty sure, have looked into China's data, energy, environment, and other issues a lot. So without using all those detailed data here, I'm just asking here, this, I think, I ask your consensus and ask you agree with me if this is a set of questions we already know at the time. That is, first, China's overall environment and ecosystem are rapidly deteriorating. We have consensus on this. We know about this. We know 70% of China's rivers are polluted. We know that 90% of those rivers floating through cities are polluted. Serious problems, deforestation, serious problems of toxic soil pollution, underground water pollution, serious problems of all sorts of air pollutions, and of course, the data and the numbers goes on. I think we know that, we have consensus on that. Number two, I think China is not only polluting itself, but also increasingly polluting the rest of the world. We know the acid rain, 80% of acid rain in the Korean Peninsula coming from China, 60% of that coming to Japan, coming from China. And we know on the West Coast here in California, along the Canadian West Coast, we have deposits from China's pollutants flowing over. We know the oceans are polluted, and we know many, many things that's going on in China's unsafe environment, and its produced products exporting to the rest of the world is a serious concern that we know in the past year. So therefore, increasingly, China's problems and is really its world's problems. And the third thing I think we know is that the environmental cost, the cost for amending to fixing the environment for China's current running modernization program is too high. Many, many examples. And we know yesterday, last night, I was looking and updating my news, but another 79 coal miners just died in a blast due to some kind of unregulated mining performance. We know that. We know China has the deadliest mining accidents from 2001 to 2005. Over some 6,700 coal miners die in China in those years every year. And on average, that's 17 coal miners die per day. Last year, official figures say that number reduced to about 4,500. That's still very significant. With all the explosions, large death, and the world doesn't even notice anymore. You know, a couple of months ago, there was 5 miners trapped in Utah. Exactly those same days, some kind of like over 100 coal miners trapped in China due to the flood and all that, barely made into the top of the news. It was Utah 5 that dominated. So we know the malignant tumor rate going up 18% in the past few years alone in the cities, and 23% in China. We know all the sort of statistics. So the problem now, we know China cannot sustain the current pace of modernization program, not the kind of economic development model it practiced in the past 30 years. Something has to be done about it, and we know that. And finally, of course, this might be the point of debate. We know at the central level, at least, I'm just coming from Beijing yesterday, doing some further interview on the newly released draft energy law. That's the first draft, was finally released for public feedback. Heavy emphasis, heavy determination on environment, on green GDP, on sustainable development. So we know the central leadership, after some considerable debate in the past few years, I'm pretty sure many colleagues from China here, and many of you outside of China, have participated in that debate and trying to persuade the Chinese leadership it is time to chart for a new course. I think there is this determination at the central level. I emphasize, I'll come back to the rest, but at the central level, there's determination from the 17th Party Congress. Something has to be done for China's new development model. Okay, so that's, I think I want to ask the question, what we know. Then the second, what we should actually also know, or the things that we actually don't know that much, or we should know better. I think I would like to emphasize and ask the question here. Number one, China's environment problems are not China's alone, but the world's problems. There are increasing emerging literature on the transfer of pollution from the rest of the world to China. China is no longer today producing for itself, consuming by itself, and polluting itself. China is a factory of the world, producing for the rest of the world, especially in the areas that actually have a lot of heavy industrial pollution and energy-heavy use. And we know, one study showed in 2004 that China's export alone, the share of China's export emissions alone is almost the same as the greenhouse emissions of Japan. And it's bigger than the total amount combined of emissions from Britain and Australia, bigger than Germany, almost the same to that of Japan. I'm pretty sure in the past few years that number is even bigger. Okay, we're looking at Western multinational corporations, primarily the American ones, have over the years moved their production bases to China. And they produce there, and they pollute there. And many of those products are coming back to sell in the rest of the world. And I think we should know that a little bit better. And the second one, that China is not the only worst polluters in the world, and certainly not on a per capita basis. I emphasize on per capita basis. China today has a per capita GDP of $2,000 versus the United States here, Canada, something like 30,000. There's a clear correlation between the per capita GDP level and the energy consumption. China is nowhere even close to that of the United States and Canada. China consumes maybe 1/7 or 1/6 of electricity or other energy use. So the other side, you flip the coin. If China, not to mention India added, and other developing countries, if they consume at the level of we consume in North America, the rough numbers are very simple. Mathematics are very simple. If every Chinese, 1.3 billion of them, if they consume on the per capita basis, like every Canadian or every American, they would need 80 million barrels per day of oil versus what they consume now. And that 80 million barrels per day is the entire world's daily supply. It's simply not sustainable, okay? But in the Chinese case, the per capita basis, even China this year or next year, overtake the United States as the worst polluter emitter of the CO2s and greenhouse effects. China, on a per capita basis, is still 1/5, that 1/4 of that of the United States, simply because China has 4 times of the US population. So how do you do the math now? Are we going to ask the Chinese to stop doing what they do, or we're reducing our share to the Chinese per capita basis in terms of pollution? Okay, number 3, to solve China's environmental problems is to solve the world's environmental problems. I think we should know that better, given the 2 points I just mentioned. Interestingly, we want to sustain the kind of lifestyle we continue to sustain. Other developing countries want to do the same. A couple of months ago, we had a conference organized in Canada, and we have colleagues from India coming. And one of the colleagues presented India's position, saying, don't lump us together with China. We're not the same as another emerging big polluter like China. India is doing service industry. India has a different type of structure. And at the end of the presentation, I asked him a question. I said, have Indian people actually stopped consuming the big items by stop buying refrigerators, stop buying air conditionings, stop driving cars? No, they're not. They're buying them from China. So simply the international division of labor the way it is basically making the production base in China and the rest of the world consuming that from China, and then making the kind of pollution targets and pollution accumulation, emission accumulation, all counting on the Chinese head. I think we should know that if we solve China's problems, if we buy from China, we better share the environmental problems China is producing. And finally, number 4, I think China, we should know, cannot really do it alone. China has a clear recognition they can't do it in the old way, in consuming the energy, in polluting the environment. But how do they do in terms of so-called technological leapfrogging? There is a consensus that at the World Bank State Council consultation last year in June, which I participated, they produced a book, Window of Opportunities for Sustainable Energy Development Future. They need technological leapfrogging. But China cannot do it alone without external help. Well, I have limited time, so number 3, there are issues we don't really know. Given what we already know and what we should know more, we don't know if China can meet its environmental challenges without fundamental changes in its political institutions our political systems. Let me not elaborate. I think Isabel has already touched on that, many of those issues. And will the current political system can accommodate? I remember Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, wrote a column maybe a couple of years ago saying, I confess a sin because I'm endorsing the authoritarian system of China, which actually being efficient in getting out better emission targets than the United States. And just recently, he wrote another column, totally conflicting himself, saying, well, actually, China's environmental challenge would be a driver for China's democratization. Without democracy, China cannot dealing with its environmental challenges. Is it the efficient totalitarian model is better or democratic model is better? That's up for debate. That we don't know. Second, the new vision is there out, a lot of hype, but will that translate into reality? It's one thing to be visionary, it's another quite to translate into that reality, especially how the policies and measures from the center, which is determined to do something, can be actually seriously carried out by the local government. The basic structure of cheating, of making up phony reports of statistics is still there. The Great Leap Forward numbers could still be forged, especially given the heavy pressure now, the Yibashou, or the #1 person in charge of all the province, all the cities, will be taken account if they don't meet certain targets of green GDP. The pressure is to meet those targets, either in reality, if not in reality, people about doing on paper. 3, whether there's commitment, I have 1 minute left, for the scientific development model, and what happens if there is an economic slowdown or other crisis? Would they still have the same commitment? And finally, to what extent Western countries, governments, not NGOs and kind-minded foundations, would help China, but really to lend a helping hand. Finally, I think to conclude, I think paradigm shifts need to happen in order for China to meet its environmental challenges. I think the short-term commitment is really to implement from central to local. The medium-term policy adjustment has to be from administrative type of measures to market mechanism. I think that's very crucial. We have so far 4 environmental protection storms, 环保风暴. I think those mass movement, central decree type of mechanism cannot work for long-term, medium, long-term. Market forces need to be introduced. I think there are good signs. Pan Yue of CIPA, Vice Minister there, has introduced many of those recently. I think that's a good orientation. Long-term, without supervision, without public right to know, without public opinion supervision, can we do it under authoritarian system? It has to be democratic. I'm not saying tomorrow has to change through a revolution, but long-term change has to come systemic. And the rest of the world, finally, and we need a China reality check. We are not well equipped in studying China today after 3 decades of rapid change. The China fantasy, in fact, the reality is change is a key word, if anything, in the past 3 decades. Rather than viewing as China as one-party state, when it comes to environmental issues, we want China to be as totalitarian as possible to rein down. At the same time, we want China to be as democratic as it is when it comes to political issues. You can't have it both ways, and China does not have the capacity. So rather than viewing China as a one-party state, I think we start better thinking about China as a big market with 1/5 of world humanity. On a per capita basis, we'd better deal with China on environmental issues in that manner, and stop the blaming game, stop criticizing, or not just criticizing, but actually engaging China on many initiatives, and finally, transfer the technology, make the leapfrogging in that area available, and I think action of cooperation and engaging China is probably the long-term solution for the rest of the world to solve the problems with China together. And 8 proposals that I presented June 1st on the World Bank China State Council forum for 2 days discussion. I was invited to talk about the climate change and crucial policy initiatives. And I think China needs to do all these. These are the 8 points coming straight from that presentation last year. And I think it needs the rest of the world to help China. And thank you very much. Yeah.
If you're going to do your 8 points, they better be swift. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next we move to C.S. Kiang, Jiang Jiase in Mandarin, who came from Georgia Tech, went to Beida, where he was Dean of the School of Environmental Sciences, and is now setting up an environmental fund there. CS has been involved in a lot of environmental issues in China and back and forth with the United States. CS?
Thank you very much. And it's a great honor to be in the university, which I think they call the Peking University of China, and Berkeley. I think they make the comparison, and we're all troublemaker. And I think, you know, when I come over here, I really didn't know what I'm supposed to talk. I just saw the program yesterday. Then my title say, balance the energy and environment, challenge and opportunity. It seems like it doesn't fit. How do we know it, and how do we know it? And I think, but after I thought a little bit, and I think maybe something maybe still related. The reason because if you really want to know, you know, Chinese have saying, know yourself, know your enemy, then 100 battle, 100 win-win. Or maybe in the contemporary world, it's know yourself, know your partner, and 100 collaboration, 100 win-win. So you have to know where we are and how much we really know about China. And that's a question. I think if in all the room, if you ask the question, do a survey, I think you're going to have a different picture of different China, maybe as much as 1.3 billion. I would like to use the first and the slides, and actually I present someplace. I don't know how I get this on. Somebody can help. Yeah, I got it.
Right there, you got it.
Yeah, I think this picture, everybody saw this maybe 5, 6 years ago, and they say, which is which? The economic or the environment? Even though our meeting is talk about environment. But I think things is changing. And this picture, when they presented, I remember 5 years ago, and Ray Anderson, he was talking about which is which. In the meantime, there are several books come out, they call eco or economic. There's tremendous debate. Which one is subsidiary? Which one is holding company? Maybe it's the environment is the big square, or is the environment just a little circle? I think at that time, everybody seems like a few years ago, big circle is economy, and a big square is economic, little circle is like environment. But I want to describe you the situation of China. China now is square and the circle. They try to put the square in the circle, or you can say try to put the circle in the square. Just depends how you're doing it and how you balance it. That's the whole challenge. And I just want to say this is not the whole challenge of China. This is the whole challenge of the whole world. I think beginning of 2007, maybe that's the time, economy is driving, the environment is driving the economy. China is the same situation. Anyway, I'm not going to go through a lot about that. I just want to show something, summarize, like Professor Jiang was talking about. There are a lot of similarity, but we give you a specific number. China, actually, you want to see, is very scarce in the resource. 1/3 of the world average, they're about 122% of the population. 1/3 of the world average of cultivated land, 1/4 of the water, 1/5 of the forest, 1/10 of oil. The overall impression, don't think China is very much rich in resource. But in the meantime, China consumes 1/8 of the oil, and 40%, that was a year ago, is 44% of the cement. and 31% of coal, and 31% of steel, 25% of aluminum. What they mean? They only have a limited resource, but in the meantime, they consume a lot. But each one of them, major one, cement, coal, and steel, they are high energy intensity. The total GDP, that was 2003, and now it's 6.6 of global GDP. What that means? That means very simple. They consume a lot, no matter how much foreign currency they have, they're still very under-efficient, very less efficient country. You can see how much resource they consume, in the meantime, how much total GDP they only have. That's very one important message. Then see what China needs to do. The environment is a consequence of that 30 years. So you have to know where's the root of the problem. Of course, population, and also called economic development. Economic development in China in the last 30 years, very simple. They use the word, it's national security. If you do not have economic development, you don't provide a job for 15 million newborn babies every year, you have no national security. You have to survive first, then you talk about quality. And then you say specific number is coming out. The World Bank estimates just air and water pollution is about 5 to 7 GDP. In the meantime, Chinese government themselves, just 2 weeks ago, and in the Sheraton Hotel, and they talk about 3 to 5%, which means if you have a double digit of the growth, in the meantime, your environment cost is a lot. So in what way the environment could be the basic infrastructure and provide a job in China. And I just want to say, use this as diagram. You say air, water, and soil. I just want you to know, I give you one example. Because I've been in the United States involved, like we call Southern Oxygen Study. We have 2,000 people in study in Houston. Houston, the downwind of Houston, is highest oxygen in the United States, but worse than the LA. The reason because 70% of the petrochemical plant is near the Houston and also Louisiana area. So you see the downwind of them, they're highly, highly oxidant, okay? More than any other place, more than LA, more than any other place. That's I just want to say, in the Pearl River Delta, in the Yangtze Delta, in the Beijing, Tianjin, Tangshan area, Bay Area, they are downwind, the same oxygen level as Houston. That's very serious. That means highly oxidant, and I just want to say, in Chinese, that means yin and yang, it's just not balanced, too much yang. I think that's not only a problem in China. I think that's not much the problem in China. I think this is the problem of the whole world. We need a little bit yin. And so ladies, try to get up, and now we need you. And also China and in everywhere, oxidant. If you want to solve the problem in air, you don't solve the problem in water, you don't solve the problem of soil, you don't solve China problem. Chinese problem is complexity, air, water, and soil. And I just want to say that's very unique Chinese characteristic. I think the most serious things I would like to call attention, not only just the environment, I think its impact on public health and the food security. I don't want to go through detail. The reason because I want to start to say, not only point out the problem, we must provide the solution. Otherwise, I think there's no reason to talk about it. I think there's so many tendencies. I look at the US or Europe and other people. They always go to China and report some of the problem of China. Nobody report what are the pollution, what is the solution. Those people usually don't get the full coverage, don't get the easy get data from China. The reason you don't have developed the trust. Develop the trust is you cover the problem and you also have to suggest the solution. If you just provide the solution, and I don't think anybody like that, you come to pick me up, pick all the problem up, and then I'm not going to share you any information. If you say, how are you going to get the information, how are you going to do it, you must earn the trust. I don't know if you know this expression or not. China, you go to China, they respect everybody, but they don't trust anyone. The reason because you have to earn the trust. Just like say you earn the so-called the freedom, you earn the civil rights, you earn the human rights. And China, the energy efficiency, everybody talk, it's very bad. 1/5 of US, 1/10 of Japan. But nobody know, specific industry sector, what they are know. We don't know. China doesn't know. If you go to China, you ask, they will tell you all those things. They give you overall the statement. Specifically, still don't know. Even China don't think about everybody else. That's not national secret. Just nobody know. And even we have a China 11 5-year plan. And everybody know energy consumption and by the renewable energy, now they changed to 15%. I gave this some years ago. Last year, I give the energy 50-year plan, China first time review, 50-year energy plan by 2003. I just want you to know, now today, they redeveloped the new 50-year plan. Just like Barbara was talking about it, everything changed so fast. If I mentioned, if I missed 1 week in China, I go back, I'm no longer expert. And I think I talk climate change because now it's very hot and China seems like in a very defensive position. But I want to say China have their point. Everybody want to know, and how do we know it? And you can see. China is state one thing very clear. The climate change is a product of industrial revolution. I want to give you a little bit of perspective. India and China, both 1949 become independent. And they both are victims of industrial revolution. One become the colonial, one becomes secondary colonial. And 1949, India become independent. China, I think the book by Anna Louis Strong, the book is Chinese Conquer China. That's 1949. I just want to say, in 60 years, China and India become emerging economic power. But now, at this moment in time, they talk about climate change, got to share the responsibility. How we share the responsibility, don't forget the history. And in China, the position about the so-called carbon dioxide, I can state very clearly. China didn't want to go along with the United States as partner together, try to solve the world problem. China would like the United States take the lead. The reason is very simple. In their mind, U.S. about energy conservation, all those things must take the action because 5% of people use 20% of the energy. That's luxury. And China, Indian, that's necessity. That's China, very clear message. So China about their so-called climate things, I don't want to talk about the possible impact, and China knows that. And also possible impact, they may not talk about it, is regional air quality, cross-border, and the water pollution, etc., and also regional weather modification. I want to say one thing, climate issue over there, China will address both mitigation, adaptation, technology, and finance. I think we just proposed, and China maybe will like to take it. China's position in climate change, they're thinking about it in the 21st century. It's not American century. 21st century is not Asia century. 20th century should be century for equity for 21st century. That's China's position. Like our student we teach in Peking University, very simple, what China can do for the world in 21st century. And we want to talk about transfer, technology. You may not. I know you were talking about green product, all this. I just come back from China, and we had about 300 people on Clean Technology Forum. You don't know how much money is invested in China. Money is not the problem. You have plenty. Chinese banks, they all go IPO. They have more money to do. They don't want to put the money in the American bond anymore. Every time you put the money over there, you lose money because Chinese RMB is going up, okay? So I think it's very important. They are going to invest, but they don't trust anybody. So if you want to earn their trust, maybe you can get money invested for all the entrepreneurs. I saw a bunch of them in the Bay Area, and also almost most the investor try to raise the fund. They're all in China. They think, for instance, climate change capital, they try to become a 10 billion investor. They have 1.5. They want another 8.5 from China. I just want to say, somebody say, where we know that? We are going to establish data center for technology need in China for improved energy efficient reduction of the green product and gas and regional pollutant. You cannot just address the greenhouse and without talk about regional pollutant, clean technology. Those are the area. And later on, anybody can take a look and which China need at this moment, this time. And also China, the climate change process, they don't believe the GA+5 will work. Even G77, it will not lead any result. So China maybe take the GA plus D6, like India, China, Brazil, all those countries, and plus other. So either you look at GOD or DOG, depending on which way you look at it. And China is going to propose the 50-year carbon reduction plan, 50-year water management plan, 50-year resource management plan. The most important message, just what timing, I want to say, China is at the crossroad for knowledge-based economic development. It's the inflection point. If that's the case, innovation, transparency, intellectual property, rule by law, just like Professor Jiang mentioned about it, it's necessity. This necessity is going to shift. No, it's not because the foreign country put the pressure on. China, for the survival, they have to do it. I just would like to make that point. For the survival themselves, they had to do it. The how you're going to do it, that's an entirely different issue. And they have a tremendous challenge, and I think if anybody wants it, I can share it, or sometimes we can use this platform to discuss what their challenge. Specifically, I think the knowledge extension and pass around from the central to government. 1.3 billion people, you want to change their mindset, is non-trivial. Thank you.
Well, thank you, C.S. Next, we'll hear from Professor Qie, who's from Tsinghua University, where he's a distinguished professor of environmental policy and management. The fields that he's covered are climate change and its impacts, global carbon recycling, ecosystem management, and he will talk about governing China's environment with correct kinds of data.
This panel covers the data issues, and we see data is a very important issue in environmental governance, and this panel focuses on data availability and data quality, and my talk is going to focus on the latter. And I'm going to cover three questions here. The first one is the data challenge, and then I'm trying to see if we can give a simple diagnosis on data collection system, how we get the data. And finally, I'm going to focus on this issue, whether or not the vertical integration of the data system, a data collection system, is a solution. I'm going to put that as a question here. And one of the very important challenges we have in environmental governance in China is this lack of information, data availability. And also, another related issue is the quality of the data. We do have a lot of data, believe it or not. And whether or not that data gives the information we need is a different issue. So, whenever I see, we have a lot of friends in works in the media business, and whenever I see a coverage on environmental problems in China, I really admire the journalists, because I wonder, how they can get the data. If we, the scientists and the researchers, have such a difficulty getting the data, I'm going to try to illustrate this point by telling a couple of stories. My story number one is this China's carbon emission. And this year, there was a report to talk about China has become the #1 carbon emission emitter in the world. Immediately, that generated a lot of discussion in China. I know the president of the Academy of Sciences, and I asked the their researchers to come up with their own estimate. Well, look at this figure. This is the carbon emission data collected by US DOE. One is the Energy Information Agency, part of the DOE. The other one is the Carbon Dioxide Information and Archive Center in Oak Ridge National Labs, also part of DOE. And you see, they actually give a quite different picture in China. The thing is, it is very, very difficult to get this kind of data in China. I know there are many experts, energy experts here, particularly people from the Lawrence Berkeley labs, like Dr. Mark Levin. They have been working very hard. But when you try to find the Chinese source of the data on carbon emission, it's actually you find a lot of standard data, and oftentimes the people have to cite data from other sources in other countries. And like this one is from DOE, and not too long ago, China has its own energy statistics and supported by some private oil companies. And it's joint collaboration between private oil company, China's State Statistics Bureau, and also the China's energy office, part of the National Development and Reform Commission. So you can see how difficult it is to get the data. So this one is for the world. Another story I have, this is my personal contact with Professor Jiang, who is a member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and we call them academician, as they're like different than the members of Academy of Sciences. Pretty outstanding. And he was invited to conduct a research on air quality in northern Jiangsu province. And I traveled with him from one city to another. Altogether, we traveled to three major cities in northern Jiangsu. In every city he got there, he will ask for data, for air quality data. He said, I only want to get one number per day, and I won't get the sulfur dioxide number. And by the end of the trip, he was very disappointed. He couldn't get any data. Not because the data is not available. The data is there, but he couldn't get the data. All right, then we came back to Beijing on the flight from Nanjing, capital of Jiangsu province, to Beijing, and he was surprised. He saw a friend who actually works in China's National General Station of Environment Monitoring. So Professor Jiang was so excited, and he asked him. He said, "Why don't you get the data? Give me the data. Do you have the data?" He said, "Yes, I do have the data." And why don't you just give me the data? He said, "Sure, not a problem. I can give all the data you want, but do you trust it?" All right. Now, another one story is this Taihu Lake. We heard late May and early June this year, and there was outbreak of blue algae in the Taihu Lake, and that affected this very big city, a city of 4.5 million people there, the drinking water for just about 1 week. And when the governor comes to visit Taihu Lake, and he was trying to get the data on the water quality. And then, of course, he come to the Environmental Protection Bureau and ask them to provide the data. And this Environmental Protection Bureau has they were very reluctant. They do have the data, but they are not quite sure whether this water quality data can tell something. And finally, the governor asked the data from the Water Management Agency. And immediately, it took like less than 5 minutes. He got all the data on water quality in Taihu Lake. So this tells the difference between Environmental Protection Agency, who is responsible for data collection, and another very different agency from another ministry, Ministry of Water Resources, actually had the data they have confidence on. So, now, this poses a very serious question. Nowadays, a lot of people are very excited about our program, a program on energy conservation and pollution emission reduction. And Professor Jiang just talked about this program, 20% cut in energy intensity and 10% cut in a major pollutant, namely sulfur dioxide and COD. And recently, 2 weeks ago, the central government just released a regulation, well, some document saying that this indicators is going to be a major indices to use for job evaluation for the local government. If you fail that, hey, you're going to have trouble. But the problem is, what kind of data you can use to evaluate the performance of local government, right, on the success of pollution control? All these data are from the local government, right? And so this poses a very, very serious question. Now, we see, you know, whenever we talk about good governance requires good data. Barbara talked about this transparency and participation. And for public participation, there has been a lot of discussion on public participation. But the problem is, in order to have public participation, the public need the data that is reliable, need the data to tell a story. In order to make environmental litigation, you do need all the data, the right information in order to make environmental litigation. Transparency, accountability, all of this require good data. Now let's look at how the data are collected and compiled in China. I know, most of you actually know this. I'm going to repeat it anyway. All right, there are 4 different levels of environmental monitoring stations. And from the very top, that's the National General Station for Environmental Monitoring. And then it comes down to the provincial level environmental monitoring center, then the municipal level, then finally the county level. The basic environmental monitoring data are collected at the county level, and then the county level submit the data, report the data to the municipal level, and one level up, and finally to the National General Station of environmental monitoring. So this is a hierarchy of 4 different levels. As many of us who study the hierarchy, we know with each level you go, up or down, there is information distortion. And there is information distortion if you're really trying to have a QA, QC, but if people trying to manipulate that data, that's a different story. So where the data are collected, there are actually national sites for collecting all this data. And the national sites, there are a couple of hundred of them all over the country. Then there are provincial sites. Provincial sites means, those sites of data collection is issued by the provincial EPBs. EPBs, I mean Environmental Protection Bureaus. And then there are municipal sites on the county sites. There are many different sites for data collection. But as I said, the basic data are collected at the county level. And how are data collected? Well, the facilities now in environmental monitoring are actually very, very good. Started in early 1980s, the State Environmental Protection Agency makes sure all the facilities are standardized. They are all important back then. And all the procedures doing the labs are very, very much the same. Is required by the national government, central government. And the funding is actually provided on all local levels, not really by the central level. For those provinces, Western provinces, they do have some funding assistance from the central government, but most of them from the local government. Standards, as I said, decided by the central government, and there is this reporting system. What does this mean? This means there are actually the good standards for collecting this data. Technically, it is not an issue. And who are they held responsible for? The local EPBs are responsible for the local government because that's the appointments are made by the local government. They have to be appointed and hired and funded by the local government. And at the same time, the local EPBs, local environmental monitoring stations, has to report up levels. So there is the so-called TEL and Quai system. And so for the data quality, the technical, if you look at the data technical aspect, so it is not an issue. So you can always get very good data for emissions and also for environmental quality alike. However, when we think about this, how this system work, for the local government, local EPB, there is no incentive. There is no incentive for them to report the good data. To the opposite, and there is always incentive, right, for the local EPBs not to report the right data, to the upper level, because if you do, because the local government could get penalized if they do report the right data to the upper level. Now, we talk about the information disclosure. Now, how do the public get their data? Well, each year in June, the public get their data from this State of the Environment report by the central government. That's pretty much it. Then there are monthly data release by those very few data items and data points. And what kind of data do they get? That's what kind of data. Now there are other sources of data, right? Remote sensing and others. So these now set as constraints of what we hear from the government system. Well, this is you can download a lot of data. Like you go Google Earth, you got a lot of data. Now, what do we mean? What the implication of this? There has been a lot of discussion on vertical integration of the environmental protection bureaus, but that is very, very difficult to get. Another way, alternative to that, would be a vertical integration of the environmental monitoring only. This system, from the top all the way down, and this has major implications for the functions of SEPA. And we propose, this is my last slide, we propose 4 elements, 4 different functions for SEPA. They all built on data, as their centerpiece. One is for SEPA, not do anything else, just develop environmental standards, emission standards and the environmental quality standards. Then to conduct this centralized and hierarchical system of the environmental monitoring. Then for SEPA, all the funding provided by SEPA and all the personnel, everything, all supported by SEPA, do the environmental monitoring. Then you can compare your data to the environmental standards SEPA made, and to see how the local government actually comply to evaluate the compliance of the local government on this. And of course, China is pretty big. For SEPA, they can also have another function to do a transboundary dispute coordination and resolution. And when SEPA complains, they have a lot to do. And they do have a lot to do, but they do a lot of things that is quite useless. And if not to, why don't you just build the functions, surrounding those data as a centerpiece? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Qi. Now, our final panelist is Lili Wang, who's a journalist, who is a PhD student at Tsinghua's School of Journalism, and this year is a visiting fellow at the Thornton Center at the Brookings Institution in Washington. And she will talk about China's environmental communication history and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing. Moment. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here on this distinguished panel. Today, I would like to briefly introduce my observation on the following topics: the history and the challenge of China's environmental communication. Now, let's start my presentation with a real story with the term of environmental communication. In 2004, when I interviewed with Professor Qu Geping about my research, he told me a real story with relief. He said when he attended the international conference before, he always met a very difficult time. He needed to explain to the Western participant about the term environmental propaganda, 环境宣传. Now, he said, now you introduce the concept, environmental communication in China. So he said this is a very good solution for his problem. Frankly and seriously speaking, China's environmental communication has running for 30 years, but the academic research in this field is still lagging behind. I think this was not a very good phenomenon for China. Okay, now I will begin in the following minute, I will briefly introduce the history and the challenge of China's EC. First, let's look back into the history. The budding, early 1970s is the budding. In early 1970s, most of Chinese would find the phrase EC a very foreign idea. During this period, China's EC was only in the initial stage. At that time, a group of keen-sighted environment activists sponsored the translation of the first series of environmental books, such as There is Only One Earth and the Silent Screen. Tsinghua Beijing Zhongshan University set up the academic program in environmental study in the China's history the first times. In 1973, the first environmental protection magazine in China history, Environmental Protection, was issued, which signified the budding of China's EC. Since 1980, large-scale environmental communication activities have been organized throughout China every year. A group of magazines and newspapers, such as People's Daily, Guangming Ribao Daily, and so on, opened the columns specializing in EC, environmental protection. In 1983, China government listed environmental protection as fundamental state policy, which provided media with good space for EC. In 1981, Animal World, China's first environmental TV program, broadcast at CCTV. In 1983, China Environmental News, the first national environment newspaper in the world, was issued. In the same year, a comprehensive publication, World Environment, co-sponsored by the State Environment Protection Administration of China and UNEP, was issued. During the 1980s, the content of EC was simple and plain, purely focused on environmental protection, with a popular style of exposing polluting accidents. The EC mostly was undertaken by a single or few media. Let's see the prosperous development. In 1993, China government launched China Environmental Protection Century Campaign, CEPCC, which was organized and co-sponsored by the Environment and Resource Protection Committee of NPC and the related section of the Publicity Department of the CPC Central Committee. CEPCC gave wide and deep publicity to environmental protection through media. As a result, public awareness of environmental protection has been greatly enhanced. The legislation of environmental has been facilitated. A lot of environmental problems have been solved. The success of this initiative is a result of its integration of the participation from administrative agencies, the judicial system, and the mass media. This is a very unique and special, very successful model in which media has played a major role in making everything visible to the general public. Let me give you a quickly introduce about the CEPCC, because I think this is a very important, very unique model. CEPCC is an ongoing event that has been running for over 14 years and has greatly contributed to China's environment cause. In 1993, Xu Geping initiated the CEPCC for the purpose of, through media, helping solve environmental problems and enhancing public awareness. This initiative was supported by China leaders and mass media. Shortly after that, the organizing committee of CEPCC was established, consisting of 14 government agencies and 25 news institutions, such as the CCTV Xinhua Agency, attended this program. Now, CEPCC has become one of the most vigorous, attractive, competitive, and the most influential activities in the environmental projects and the media circle. CEPCC also has become the corridor of China's environmental journalists and the main force of Chinese environmental communication. During this period, the third period, EC expanded from purely focusing on environmental protection to the comprehensive coverage on environmental impact on economic and social development. Maintaining its style of criticizing polluting accident, media also praised the benefit of well-protected environment. Meanwhile, no longer being limited to a single or few media outlets, EC has been undertaking increasing numbers and types, which are interacting together and more effectively with government and the legal authorities. Okay, based on description of the history, I think the 3 points to remember are the following. The first, China's environmental communication is dominated by the government and decided by using a top-down approach. Second, mass media is the major driver of environmental projects in China. They are the two sides of the coin and not separable. Third, EC provides a great forum for the government, the public, enterprise, specialized organizations, and the whole society. Okay, now I would like to move on to the second question, the challenge. Currently, although most media have realized that environmental projects is a hot topic, and many journalists are active in this field, but EC is still facing a lot of severe challenges. The financial challenge, the media environment awareness challenge, public awareness, environment awareness challenge, and the capacity, ability of environmental communication challenge. Let's see the first challenge, the financial challenge. In China, environmental communication is regarded as a public service, which is barely any short-term business benefit or even no benefit. Therefore, mass media are in a dilemma between social responsibility and economic benefit. Furthermore, most of the environmental NGOs are faced with very big financial challenges. Let me check my website, China Environment and Resource Network, as an example, because I'm the co-founder and the vice president of this website. This is an NGO in China. CERN is a professional environmental network, which is now the most visited and influential in China environmental circle. CERN was initiated in 2001 and received investment from UVN Company, a high technology company in Beijing. In 2001, CERN won the Ford Mobile Environmental Protection Prize for its contribution in raising environmental awareness in China. Since 2002, CERN has maintained a high volume of online visitors and has played a positive role in China's EC circle. The finger 1 and the finger 2, so you can see from the finger, from 2004 2007, we still maintain a high-level volume of online visitors, but we're still facing a lot of challenge on financial aspect. Because at present, most of the Chinese enterprises still think advertisement on the environmental media can't achieve environment advertisement effect is expected. Moreover, most customers and clients in China consider environmental protection as a public service without profit space. So currently, CERN are facing the bottleneck of operation and development due to lack of funds. More urgently, for the same reason, we we only have Chinese version, and it is very difficult for us to develop our global communication. Let's see the second challenge, media environment awareness. As we know, the management and the journalists are the major body in media industry. The environment awareness and environment-related qualification of them will affect directly the quantity and the quality of environment communication. As far as the management is concerned, the environmental awareness directly impacts the media's investment of human and capital resource to EC. However, at present, the most of management in China's media hasn't realized the importance of environmental protection, which has resulted in a lack of EC. As far as the journalists is concerned, most of journalists in China's media have traditionally lacked professional training in EC. Therefore, they don't have a deep understanding of environment issues. As a result, the journalists often make mistakes when they're reporting on EC. The third challenge, the public's environment awareness. Since environment protection was listed as a fundamental state policy in 1983, the environment awareness of China public has been greatly improved, but frankly speaking, is still weaker than that in the developed countries. According to the latest research report by National Environmental Protection Administration, the public awareness in China demonstrates the following characters. The first is the public has limited knowledge about environment, and their participation in environment protection is insufficient. The second, the public heavily relies on the government, and most of the public in China think the environmental protection is the responsibility of the government. Third, the public has limited environment awareness. For instance, 75% of them never take the environmental factor into consideration when they do shopping. Finally, the challenge of ability of environmental communication. In the current media system, there are not many participations specialized in environmental protection. Most of the professional environmental newspapers and magazines in China have small circulation and limited influence. And at the same time, there are no TV and radio channels specialized in environment yet. And most of the websites are struggling for survival and have more enough financial strength for environmental communication. I would like to give you a case. I think most of you know the CCTV 10. CCTV 10 is a channel for science education at CCTV. There are a few environmental programs at the CCTV 10, but its ratings are very slow, and it only has limited influence on the public. According to a recent nationwide survey on 44 TV channels, CCTV overall has a rating of 25%, but the CCTV 10 only have a rating of 1.4%. In addition, environmental communication program in China has lagging behind in concept and style. Many programs only teach environmental knowledge, explain environmental phenomena, or discuss environmental topics. Okay, finally, I would like to share my dream with every one of you. I hope mass media in China will truly become the green media, can help China meet its environmental challenge in its peaceful rising. And I also hope all the people in the world, all the country in the world, break the limit of country, of culture, and the social system, work together, especially for US and China, respected as a developed country and the most developing country in the world. I think we should work together, strengthen our understanding and cooperation for the same blue sky, the same earth. Thank you so much. I would like to say, because my English is not very fluent, I have been American only 1 month. My pronunciation not very clear, I think. I hope you can understand my mean. If you don't understand, please let me know. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lili. Now, we have barely 15 minutes for questions, so let's get right to it. Question right here. Just wait for the mic. It's coming around the back.
Yeah, I have a question for the last speaker about the state of web video being used to inform or have dialogue about environmental issues in China.
Did you understand that question?
Okay, you want to know the role and the function of China's NGO in China's environment protection system?
Web
video.
In the United States, a lot of TV is being superseded now by the use of web video. It's a big trend, and I just wonder.
I understand your question.
If that's being used in China as an alternative to CCTV's low ratings.
Okay, you know, my website, we have a program about the meaning. The program name is a public service advertisement. So if you visit our website, you can see the public service advertisement, the video. And I think the video has, the TV has a very important influence and a very important role in China's media system. Because in China, we have 1.3 billion people, and the TV is very popular. The internet is not very popular in China because of most of the Chinese people living not very good life. They have no financial, no more money to buy the internet. But the TV is very cheap, so they can buy the TV and enjoy the information from the TV. I don't know if, can you understand my mean? Thank you.
In the back there, and then over here, first here.
I have a question from Chia about the new regulations on the evaluation of officials and the giving greater weight to their performance on environmental protection. My question is, how specifically is this spelled out? Does it say what dimensions of environmental protection will be evaluated, and how does it rank environmental protection in comparison to the other measures by which provincial and lower level officials are evaluated?
Thank you. As you know, the so-called green indices has been developed in the last couple of years, well, has been in discussion in the last couple of years. The most recent one is about evaluation for the energy conservation and the pollution control. And this is very as recent as 2 weeks ago, they just released 3 major documents detailing how they're going to do it. Energy, it's a 20% energy intensity decrease. Then that is already allocated for all the provincial government, all the way down to the county government. And also for the 10% cut in major pollutant, sulfur dioxide and COD, this is also there. And in the this pollution control, these two indicators, they developed some methods how they are going to calculate the reduction. And in that, the central government acknowledged there is a tremendous difficulty to calculate exactly what the baseline is. Therefore, what they're going to do is they are going to calculate the total pollution, total sulfur dioxide emission and COD emission based on GDP. It's like a fraction. It's a percent. It's like a coefficient to multiply the GDP, and then they are going to see how many more environmental treatment facilities are built, what their capacity is, then subtract that from that total calculation. This actually has generated a very big headache for the local government, because the local government tend to report a bigger GDP, then they will calculate a bigger environmental pollution. Then what they are going to check, what the central government is going to check, is going to check the environmental facilities. So this is it's a pretty smart way, but there are issues. You know, one issue is about that the baseline. The other issue is we know the government changes. The changes next year, right? Then in March, there are going to be a major change of the local government and the central government. So who's going to bear the responsibility? And there is overlap between the 5-year plan and the government change in the middle. So that is going to be a practical difficulty the government is going to have. Of course, we can share a lot more on this. This is a very, very interesting development the last year or so. All right.
Does anyone else on the panel want to very quickly assess the likelihood that green GDP standards, which have had a very rocky start, are actually going to be implemented in a meaningful way?
I can quickly go there. I just have a paper published on green GDP. This one is the year for 2004 was calculated. 2005 was also calculated. It started with a great momentum, and it has been stopped. I don't really see any sign they are going to actually apply the green GDP in any near future. And everybody knows Pan Yue, right? This is Pan Yue's idea. But Pan Yue doesn't know the politics, and that's a problem. You know, it's a very good indicator, and very much worthwhile for research. But Pan Yue and SIPA wants to use green GDP as indicator to evaluate the job performance of local government. I think he has gone in a wrong direction, because this is a very, I mean, it's a right direction, but it's a very difficult to do technically and politically.
Well, it sounds like this is a topic we might want to discuss more in coming sessions. Yes, right in the back, please.
Good morning, and thank you for this conference. It's very exciting to know that we're going to keep the air clean. I wanted to ask Dr. Jiang and Dr. Jiang, CS and Wenran, about the comments on natural resources that are needed for this very large population in the world. Last week or week before last, Dr. Wang from Harvard University visited us at the Goldman School of Public Policy and let us know that China has expanded its interest in development in African countries, approximately 36 African countries. I wanted to know to what extent we can expect best practices of environmental development in those areas, particularly given the fact that you were talking about the necessity to develop capacity building within these infrastructures. Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, very good question. Actually, I've made a number of presentations and write some policy papers regarding China's development model and its engagement in the energy and environment area in Africa, such as not only Africa, but also Latin America. To briefly address your question, I think this is the dilemma. At the central leadership level, there is good will, good commitment of going to Africa, doing some good things, at the same time extracting resources and the materials for China's domestic continuous sustainable economic growth. But at the same time, China is no longer the China of 1960s, giving some aid money, brother in arms, ideologically based alliance. It's market-oriented. Many of the promotions for private enterprises to invest and expand in Africa are done by the private enterprises through market forces. So the catch-22 situation is that when you have a cutthroat capitalist competitive kind of economy as we see in China, that practice a model primarily over the past 20 plus, nearly 30 years of GDP first. So the question the rest of the world, especially from Africa, we need to ask, if a country like China moving rapidly towards very competitive capitalism, very much the 19th century style kind of primitive accumulation, as some people called, how can you expect them not to respect their own environmental regulations, exploit their own workers with low wages, polluting their own environment, and at the same time going to Africa to do all good and to reverse all that trend domestically? So if it comes to market forces, naturally, they would do exactly what they do back at home. They want to extract profits. They want to get as low environmental standards as possible, and they want to exploit. And that's just a model. How can you expect them to do better for foreigners if they don't even do it at home? So Hu Jintao may go to Africa last February in Zambia to lecture the local Chinese entrepreneurs and saying, well, you should care the local people, care this, and that's kind of a political lecture. The market forces go otherwise. So the lessons for the rest of the world is looking at engagement with China, not in terms of just bilateral relations, what we deal with China, how do we deal with China, understand the domestic dynamics of China's development dilemmas and problems, and solve those problems. And you solve those problems internally in China, you solve the China's problems with what we call the externalization of China's domestic development problems. Thanks.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Maybe right back here. Hang on just a second. CS, do you have a quick comment?
I would like to look at different view about, because I was in Africa twice, and this time, and we make the recommendation to the Department of Commerce and also Foreign Affairs, because about their exercise so far in Africa, almost like the 19th century, like you described. So I think the Chinese government recognize their problem now. And I think they are, for instance, even the international school and of government in Peking University or other, they started training about their foreign affairs people to recognize the resource competition is a very important issue. And also about the Commerce Department, they are very different. The reason because they go over there, they just exploit, and that need to be training too. In the meantime, China is going to have so-called conservation leadership training program between China and also Africa, because China have about 54 minorities. Chinese Han, they treat their minority almost like some other country treat the other country. They seem that they know everything how to do it. But in the meantime, they try to do the leadership development program, generate the sensitivity with the local. For instance, our Peking University, we have such a program and in Africa and with the Stockholm and Environmental Institute. So I think it's the process of learning and how to become South and South relationship between China and also in Africa. And now they suddenly become the North and China. And also the competition between Taiwan, because Taiwan always will put the money into the Africa in order to have a diplomatic relationship. So China just put more money, and the money end up in the dictator, in other, not truly reach the people. I think that they recognize their problem, and they started. This year, they start to change the position in Darfur, okay, in Zimbabwe. I think they are learning process. I think I just would like to say, and it's not easy. Suddenly, you change the position, and from the south to south, and then to north to the south. There are a lot to learn.
Okay, we have one, make a quick question, and then we'll have hopefully a quick answer because we have to adjourn for lunch. Please.
I wanted to follow up on Chia's comments about energy intensity and how the government will create a reliable metric for the data that it receives from the local governments. I confess I didn't fully understand your comments about creating a baseline and going to check the environmental treatment facilities. Could you please explain, this is such a crucial issue that I think it's worth talking more about, how will the government really ensure that the info that it receives from local governments is accurate?
Well, the central government now, they put together some teams, and for the energy sector is probably easier, how much energy would get used, and then because there are only two variables over there. One is the GDP, the other one is the energy use, but for the environment, it is a little different than measuring the sulfur dioxide and the COD, because they have such a big spatial and temporal variation and varies from one place to another. That is a very big challenge. what the government now is putting together some teams at the central level, and they're going to go to the local government and then to actually check, to verify and validate whether or not the report from the local government is actually what they are, is actually true or not. So I think that is so far the central government is trying to do right now. But as I see it, pretty soon they will face this capacity issue. Rather than there are a lot of issues we covered here. Also, we talk about political or institutional issues, but actually, many of the environmental problems we face now in China is a capacity issue. This is also, pretty soon you'll see whether or not the central government does have the capacity to verify all those reports. Right?
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of the Berkeley China Initiative, let me thank you for coming. We'll break now and reconvene at 2:30. Thank you.